You guys, today's guest traded in eternal salvation for a latte. Literally. Born and raised in the Latter-day Saints Church, Alyssa checked every single righteous Mormon box. She was baptized at 8, went on a full-time mission, got married in the temple, you name it, she did it. And at 25, she said damn for the first time, and she never ever looked back. Today, we're diving into all things Mormon, sacred undergarments, coffee bands, sister wives in heaven, and what really happens when you leave behind the only life that you've ever known. Welcome, Alyssa Grenfell. Welcome to Steph & T, where every week I'm going to introduce you to the people behind jaw-dropping, life-altering, true stories from all over the world. I'm Stephanie Jones, TV host, storyteller, and your partner in crime for the wildest podcast ride you've ever been on. Each episode, you'll hear shocking stories that'll make you realize we humans are capable of anything. Now, let's spill the tea. Alyssa, let's get right into it. You are the girl that gave up eternal life for coffee. I mean, is caffeine that good? And for those who don't know, tell us really, why don't Mormons believe you can drink caffeine?
Yeah, so it's actually more complicated than that because you can drink caffeine, but you can't drink coffee. So a lot of people think that the caffeine is what makes the coffee bad, but it's a fact that it's coffee that makes the coffee bad. So it's part of the Mormon health code called the Word of Wisdom, which also prohibits other things like tobacco and alcohol, but you also can't drink green tea or coffee, but you can drink Diet Coke, which doesn't really make sense.
I know from watching the show The Secrets, like Mormon Wives on Hulu, that they drink all like these, I guess sugary kind of sodas. I'm sure I've got caffeine in, but I wasn't sure if is it because that they're cold drinks that they're allowed and that they're not hot or something?
Yeah, no, there's, if you really dig even an inch beneath the surface of the logic of this health code, it really doesn't make a lot of sense. Some people will say, can I have iced coffee? Because it's not a hot beverage, but you can't have iced coffee. In my family, we couldn't have coffee cake. We didn't even call our coffee table a coffee table. We called it the living room table. And so they can basically drink lots of sugary drinks, lots of caffeinated drinks, but as long as it doesn't include coffee, they're still following the rules.
Okay, well, just from that tip of the iceberg alone, we have got a lot to get through. But before I do get into it, what was it like the first time you did actually drink a latte or a cappuccino or something, seeing as it was so forbidden?
Yeah, it's so funny. It's kind of anticlimactic because you're taught that it's so evil, and there was a speech given once where this woman was kind of kept out of Mormon heaven because she drank coffee. And so when I tried it for the first time, you sip it and I feel like I was almost expecting, if you've seen a movie where someone like does drugs and they just go insane, I felt like maybe the first time I tried coffee I would just start ripping things off the wall and flipping tables or something in a caffeinated rage, but it was very underwhelming. It was just a nice little sip of a tasty beverage in a quiet and calm coffee shop, and I was like, well, this is not the evil I was expecting from this experience.
I am definitely a coffee addict myself, so I don't know what that says about me, but let's rewind. Alyssa, thank you for joining me today. I think it's very brave how you speak out, tell your truth, and bring a completely different perspective to a world that's kind of, unless you're in it, people have got no idea about it. There are so many misconceptions, questions. So I'm really grateful that you're going to help answer a few of those today. You were raised in the Mormon Church. You served a mission. You graduated from BYU. You were married in the temple. Like, really, the cookie-cutter kind of Mormon wife life, right? Paint a picture of what was it like growing up in childhood as part of the Mormon Church?
I would say, as a kid, if you don't really understand that your childhood is different from the people's childhoods around you, it feels normal because it's all you know. But I think it was mostly defined by just being at church kind of all the time, like family prayer, family scripture study, family home evening, early morning seminary, camps over the summer, girls camp. So there's so many things I could point to where you're just kind of consistently being deeply involved in that community, and so it means that comes first, and all the other experiences of childhood feel like they more or less pale in comparison to how big the church was in my life.
And a part of that you were really told about what your role would be expected of as you were to continuing to leave childhood and become a woman, right? What were you told was the role of a Mormon woman growing up?
I was told that my role would be to be a wife and a mother, and that was my primary role and divine nature. So even when, I remember someone in my class once asking, why do we even need to go to school or high school or college if we're going to be wives and mothers? And the rationale was, well, someday your husband might die, and you also need to be able to teach your children to read. I was never encouraged, to make my career the center of my life. It was always learning to cook, learning to plan meals. It was very much focused on preparing me to view my role in life to be the support to my husband and a wife and a mother.
What in Mormon terms makes a good wife? What does that look like? What kind of woman or wife were you expected to be?
I think just picture the most traditional 1950s wife that does the laundry, cooks the food. The husband comes home and immediately sits in the comfy armchair, turns on the TV. She brings him his food. She is never on birth control, just continuously popping out children, caring for the children. Everyone's all dressed the same. And of course, the whole time she should still look as hot as possible while doing it, because beauty is also a huge aspect, in my opinion, of being a perfect traditional wife.
I know from some of your social media posts, you said that as a child, you were actually given a manual on how to raise children and how to be this perfect wife. I don't know if you still have it now or if you remember all of the things that were in it, but when you look back at it, is there anything that you're literally like, what on earth were they saying to me?
Yeah, it's called Personal Progress, and I don't have the manual anymore, like in physical form, but yeah, it was very much about that, our role as girls. You start this at 12, but you also start a different program that's, targeted toward the same types of conversations at 8. So as early as 8, I was learning to babysit, learning to brush my hair, learning and take care of myself and grooming. The formal activity would be, we're going to go to the nursery and we're going to clean the nursery toys. And that's your 8-year-old's activity, while the boys are going on hikes or playing basketball. It was called Personal Progress, and it was very much geared toward accepting and loving your divine nature as a woman, and a huge part of that was preparing to be a mother.
What are some of the weirdest beliefs that they told you or you at the time really believed, and looking back now you're like, hold up a minute, what?
I mean, my modesty was a huge thing. It took me years after leaving the church to be able to even wear a bikini or wear a tank top. No coffee, no alcohol, garments after you get in the endowment ceremony, so you have to wear special religious underwear 24/7. Very few occasions where you're, quote, allowed to take it off. I mean, no swearing, no R-rated movies, no gambling. Kind of think of any questionable or sin adjacent behavior, and it was completely off limits. Even at BYU, you could still get kicked out of the university if you are showing any sort of same-sex behavior, is what they call it. So holding hands, cuddling, kiss on the cheek could land you in some sort of disciplinary action.
Were you living in fear of what would happen if you were to accidentally break a rule?
A lot of the fear is self-imposed because of how thoroughly you're indoctrinated to believe in the things. The guilt from something as simple as saying the word damn could make you feel so guilty that you feel like you need to confess it to the bishop. So I had multiple times where I'd feel incredibly guilty about a very small, on my mission, I watched 20 minutes of a secular movie, and I literally confessed that to my leader because the guilt was eating me alive. So, it's not like I was afraid because I was necessarily thinking I would get excommunicated, but it was more that I felt so deeply guilty from these tiny little things that I felt like I needed somebody to absolve me of my guilt so that I could even slightly feel comfortable with myself.
Oh my gosh. I mean, that's a lot of pressure. I'm sure you were told you go and tell the bishop, and a lot of fear, like if you do tell the bishop, will there be any repercussions? Did you ever feel like that? Like if there's something that they thought was really bad?
Yeah, there's a whole spectrum of repercussions. There's no more taking the sacrament. You can't attend certain activities. There's excommunication. So there's certain things they can impose upon you, or they might just require you to meet with them every week. So a common story is if someone confesses to masturbation, they have to meet with the bishop every single week until the issue is resolved. And I think the biggest one is just the mental weight of always feeling like you've sinned and that you are unhappy with yourself.
And that's got to be really hard. And like, let's be honest, growing up and being a teenager, hormones, life is literally hard enough without all this like added pressure, which sounds super intense.
Yeah, so yeah, I feel like I really didn't have room to just be a teenager or just experience, making some mistakes. I think what it taught me too was to really be secretive and never tell my parents anything, because even if I had a friend that would say, damn, I would be nervous that my parents would ever find that out, because then they would tell me I couldn't spend any more time with that person. So even just the level of isolation to try to make it so that if you do have something you're ashamed of, you don't want anyone to find out about it because you feel like the fallout from the sin is going to be so severe.
At what point then did you start feeling like, hey, I don't actually feel like all of this is quite right? Was it a really slow unraveling of things, or was it one huge thing that was like, you know what, I am done, this is not for me?
Yeah, I think looking back, I have a lot of instances where I would have something happen to me. For example, seeing really strict gender roles and being frustrated by how much the boys got to play while the girls were cooking and cleaning. I would have lots of moments where I'd feel like, this doesn't feel right. But I would reflect it on my own insufficiencies rather than seeing it as something's wrong with the system I'm in.
Right.
So it wasn't until I was around 22 that I started really putting the pieces together of realizing I am making major life decisions based off of these revelations I'm receiving from God. And much of the time they are truly not working out for me or are completely proven to be false. And it it definitely unraveled from there.
What did it actually look like when you decided I am actually going to leave? What did that day look like when you woke up or you had those initial conversations with your friends or family and you're like, I'm moving to New York, I'm going? And then what was their reaction like?
Yeah, it was telling your family, I think, is one of the most scary and difficult things, especially with my record in the church was so sterling. I had been married in the temple just, a year prior, and that's a very big deal to get married in the temple, massive religious promises as part of that wedding and union. And so I was definitely pretty worried, and I would say everyone that is not an immediate family member who I was associated with basically cut me off and stopped talking to me. And the funny thing is that as the years have gone on and some of those people have left, they've reached back out and said, hey, I'm out of the church now, I'd really love to talk and connect. And I don't feel a lot of anger to them because of that, just because I do feel like they're taught to do that. You're taught to withdraw from people who choose to leave your church, the Mormon Church. And so I feel like I'm happy whenever people leave so we can finally be friends again.
That's got to be really hard because you've grown up knowing these people and you're in church together, you're in schools together, you're living your lives together. Like, you've always got each other's backs because, like you say, if one of your friends was even to say something, you're worrying about them so much and protecting each other, I suppose. So to go from such a big thing where you're literally watching every single movement of everybody and you feeling like you're a unit to then being completely isolated, that's got to hurt.
Yeah, I think the thing that hurt the most is just that you truly feel like you love these people and they love you. And then when you leave and realize that the love is conditional, it really hurts. So I think it's very alienating when you leave. There's very few people in your corner.
That's also like a tactic from the church, right? To make it more scary, to make it like that people don't leave. It's like a way of controlling you all a little bit more, I would say.
Yeah, whenever I left, there was a speech from a Mormon leader, and he used the phrase, "Where will you go?" And he said, there's nowhere that you can go that has this much truth, this much happiness. Where will you go to find this much goodness? It doesn't exist. And it's almost like what an abusive ex would say, like, no one's gonna love you like I do. And I think that it really does seep into your consciousness to feel like, if I leave, my life will never be as good. And then if you see other people leave, you think, how could they forsake all of their covenants? People will say that I sold my birthright for a mess of pottage, which is from the Bible, but I'm like, man, it's pretty great out here. The water's fine. I think that the fear-mongering just keeps people in for longer.
one thing that was a big shock when you left was a year prior, you had just got married in the temple, which is incredibly sacred. Tell me a little bit about how you did meet your husband. How did he come into your life? And how did all of that happen?
After I served my mission, so I got endowed before my mission. So I already was wearing the garments, the religious underwear. I had already done the temple ceremony with the green apron and the white outfit. You can see it on my YouTube channel if you're curious. So by the time I met him, we had both returned from our missions. He was served his mission in Sweden. I served in Colorado. And so from the time that we met to the time we got married was about 10 months. And even that in Mormon circles is kind of a long engagement. I knew more than one or two people who got engaged in 2 weeks and then married within a couple months. We had a very quick courtship and dating. He proposed, and then we had our wedding day. And at that point, I think we both were still all in. We both were completely believing and wanted to get the blessings that are promised with temple marriage. And so even though there was a lot of things about my wedding day that I truly, really didn't like, even on the day of, I felt like it was a small price to pay in order to get the blessings that you believe are held in the temple, which is that your marriage will last into the afterlife. And the only way you can get your marriage to last in the afterlife is to get married in a LDS temple.
Right, okay. So part of being married is there is a belief in the culture there that there's polygamy in heaven, but only for the men and not the women. So that would lead you then possibly to believe that your husband might go on in the afterlife to be able to have multiple wives. How was that explained to you? You don't know any different, but you're signing up for this, right? Like, this is a possibility.
Yeah, it truly was quite scary. And I remember before I met my husband on my mission, I had several conversations with my female mission companions, and I remember one person in particular that I broke the news to her that men could have polygamy in heaven, men could have multiple wives, and us as women could have sister wives. And she was so distraught for days. She talked to the mission president, she talked to the bishop, and, you know, from the outside in, I think when you look at this, it just sounds kooky and silly, but when you're a woman living in it, you really are believing that in the afterlife, you're going to have to share your husband with another woman, potentially. I remember just feeling like I have to make sure to outlive my husband so that he can't, or so that he doesn't go and marry someone else after me, because if he gets sealed to her in the temple, then I will have a sister wife in heaven. And so there's really nothing you can do to prevent it. And then if your husband dies, you can't go and get sealed to another man unless you basically spiritually divorce your husband from the afterlife and then get your new man that's living. It's very convoluted and a little complicated to explain, but as a woman getting married, you are consciously having to think about the fact that your husband could remarry after you die and you will have a sister wife in heaven.
So literally, you're led to believe is you get married. If you pass before your husband does, he's entitled to remarry. And when you say about your sealing, but sealing is basically where you're, like, I guess, buried with your husband. Is that correct?
Sealing is what Mormons refer to as eternal unions. So if my husband gets sealed to me, we have an eternal union. If I die early, if I die when I'm 50 and he lives to 70, he gets a second eternal union sealing. And then in the afterlife, he is eternally wed to both women.
So as a woman, you're living in fear of this, right? Like, this must be absolutely petrifying. And it's deemed to just be like something you have to accept and get on with. So basically, your ultimate goal is to outlive your husband.
I mean, I think I also at the time viewed it as a trial of my faith, that God is going to work it all out in the end. And that if I do pass away early and my husband marries a second woman, and then in heaven, it's the three of us all living together, I have to have sufficient faith that that will be a good and happy thing rather than something that I'm jealous or feeling like I'm 50% of his wives.
So then what happens on the other hand, Alyssa? So let's say your husband passes before you do and you've still got a long life to lead. How do you then get another Mormon man to agree to marry you? Because he, I'm sure, will be like, well, you're already sealed to somebody else.
Yeah, so this is a huge problem if the first union doesn't work out. Even if the husband doesn't die, I knew someone who, she divorced her husband because he was abusive and he put her in the hospital and they would not allow her to break the sealing. According to the belief, according to her comprehension, she was still eternally wed to him in heaven. And the only way that she was able to get that eternal union cut was to find a new man to seal herself to. So basically, in order to escape the abusive husband in the afterlife, she has to, like a piece of property, she has to transfer herself as property to a different man in the temple, and then that will save her. But she cannot save herself. She was not able to cut that union unless she found a new man to kind of take her on, basically.
Oh my gosh, I mean, that must be absolutely petrifying, because in her mind, she's like, I'm literally got eternal abuse on the cards for me here, unless I can meet someone else and they will marry me and they will accept that I've been married before, and so on and so forth. Like, that must be petrifying.
Yeah. It is for anyone who's ever suffered spousal abuse or parental abuse. These doctrines become almost like shackles, because it's difficult to break the everlasting union. You have to get approval from the highest level of the church. And so if your family is not so sweet and happy as you planned for it to be, you're basically stuck in the union. And if you believe in it, then you're going to be stuck with them in the afterlife for all eternity.
Oh my gosh, talking about God and the faith and the temple, which is where you had your wedding to ensure that your marriage would be as successful as possible with all the blessings that were promised to you. You've been very open about regretting certain parts of it. So what exactly did you regret?
I feel like the reason I was willing to allow the church to dictate so much of my wedding was because I felt like that was the price I had to pay in order to get the eternal union. And so, for example, you get married in the temple and you schedule your wedding with the temple, but they schedule a lot of brides on the same day. When I entered the room where, this is the room you get ready, there's mirrors, there you can fix up your makeup, you can get changed. There were 2 or 3 other brides in the room on my wedding day. And I don't think anybody really thinks that they're going to have to share their wedding day with other girls that are getting married. But I remember bringing in my little bag and just looking for a tiny corner to set it down in, and then if you're sharing a bathroom with other girls, you're trying to get in the mirror, like a little piece of the mirror so you can see. And I also wasn't allowed to wear my wedding dress, which is so crazy. You'd think you could wear your wedding dress on your wedding day, but I refer to it as my wedding reception dress, because in the temple, you're required to wear a dress that goes to your wrists and up to your collarbone, and it has to be perfectly white, and my dress was off-white. I was a cream color, and so on the day of my wedding, the temple matron held up a piece of computer paper to my dress and said, "It's not wide enough, so you can't wear it. You have to change into this dress," which was dingy, like, I don't know, maybe it was a $50 dress, which is a fine amount, but you don't really dream of wearing a shapeless $50 cheap dress for your wedding, especially when you've already bought a really nice and expensive and special true wedding dress. Yeah.
I mean, gosh,
so that's two things.
In that moment, you went along with it because you continued to go and get married. But, I mean, in that moment, did you have the courage to say, no, I want to wear this is mine, please? What would have happened if you had said that?
I think they would have just said, well, you can't get married today then if you don't follow the rules. But when you're raised in a church like this, you aren't in the mindset of questioning authority. It's more like you say yes, and that's really the only option. And so I just went along with it. 2 of my siblings weren't allowed to see my wedding. My grandma wasn't allowed to see my wedding. My husband's mom was also not a member, not allowed to see my wedding. And so even just who was allowed to enter, that was really frustrating. And like I said, I mean, I knew that they wouldn't be able to come inside going into this whole thing, but looking back, I realized that I should not have been willing to give that up in order to get this blessing. So you're sacrificing something for no reason.
What were the church's reasons for not allowing certain members of your family in? Is it solely because they weren't members of that particular church?
To go into the temple, you have to have a temple recommend, and you have to be an endowed member. So to be endowed means you've done the washing and anointing ceremony, you wear the religious underwear, and you've had a temple recommend interview where the bishop certifies that you're righteous enough to go in the temple. So it's a very stringent process, and there's a lot you have to agree to. And so even though, for example, one of my siblings was a member, she had not done the endowment ceremony. So even though she was paying tithing, she was totally righteous, living all of the rules, because she hadn't done the ceremony, she still couldn't see my wedding. It is really cruel because even righteous members of the church oftentimes aren't allowed to go and see the wedding in the temple. And then for the other people, they just weren't members. And so if you're not a member, you're not allowed to go. So it really thins the crowd of who's allowed to actually see your wedding.
And that's something you just, I suppose, like, if you want to get married, you want to be in the temple, you want to secure what you believe will be a marriage that goes into this other lifetime, this everlasting life. That's just simply what you've got to do.
Yeah. It's frustrating, and having someone ask you to change out of your own wedding dress on your wedding day is really just shocking. But I remember when she said, you need to change out of that dress, I was like, okay, where do I go? Where's the room to change? I just had no bone in my body that was going to question authority in that way.
Your marriage to your husband, even though you have left the church, has lasted and you are still together now. What did that look like, going from both of you being so religious to then both of you going, you know what? Let's both leave together.
It was definitely a scary transition. I brought it up to him first because I said, I'm questioning. I don't know if I believe anymore. And he was very loving. I was raised in a family where everyone was members, and so I had mostly been raised with people who were very, very devout, but my husband's mom was no longer active in the church, and so he would split time between an active Mormon family to a non-Mormon family, essentially. So I think he was just more primed to feel like if we left, that was going to be okay. And he had seen an example in his life of a loved one who wasn't a member, who was also still a good person. And so I think after I kind of came out to him as not wanting to be in the church anymore, we had a ton of conversations. It took about 6 months for both of us to be in this constant loop of what are we going to do? How do we tell our family? How do we move past this? And then we finally decided to leave together.
Well, I'm glad that you did find your person, and I'm glad that you did have the support that you needed and the love to get you through something that's incredibly difficult and I'm sure very scary as well.
Yeah, me too. I've personally know people who have gotten divorced over things like this.
I can imagine so many of both situations, and it must be incredibly hard either way because there's so much to navigate. You've committed to someone for what you believe will be eternity also, and then to not even be able to have a conversation with them like, hey, I'm questioning this.
Yeah, it is crazy. When I did my endowment ceremony, it's a very culty experience. Lots of chanting, strange clothing. You have to stand with a man on the other side of the curtain, and he holds your hand and you give him a hug and have to whisper code words into his ear, and there's secret handshakes. I didn't tell my husband how much I hated that experience until after we started questioning our faith. So it took about 2 years and a year's worth of marriage before I was finally ready to be honest and say, hey, 5 years ago when I got this ceremony done, I hated it. Did you hate it? And it was funny that it wasn't until we left or were questioning that we were finally being candid and honest with each other.
Well, I think that's part of like the hold that the religion has over you too, right? And the fact that it is expected of you that you just go along, you do it, you don't question. So it makes sense that you would literally need that time to feel comfortable with your husband and know, like, this is where I'm at, this is what I'm thinking and feeling.
Yeah, it's a very long process, and it's crazy that you can get married to someone and you're still putting your church before that person. I'd rather be true to the church than be honest with my husband.
You mentioned it was a bit of a culty experience for you and things that you just were really uncomfortable doing or just didn't like it. There are certain things that I've read that I've never had any experience in my life, so I'm curious to know your thoughts on things like you guys did baptisms but for the dead. So what what is going on there? How do you baptize the dead?
When you hear baptisms for the dead, you picture someone exhuming a body from a graveyard. So it's not that. According to Mormon belief, everyone has to be baptized as a Mormon in order to go to the highest level of Mormon heaven. But obviously less than 1% of the Earth's population is Mormon. And so that means that they do baptisms by proxy for those who have passed on. So say you get baptized in the church. Here you are, alive and well. You want your great-great-grandma to be able to receive the blessings of Mormonism, and you know she won't be able to get into Mormon heaven without it. And so you take her name, you go to the temple, and they literally baptize you, and they say, this baptism is for and in behalf of your great-great-grandma, Denise or whatever. And then...
Right.
And you would be baptized. So the goal is to literally baptize everyone who's ever existed on the planet. They got in big trouble with Judaism in general because it was discovered they were baptizing people who had passed away in the Holocaust or who had died in the Holocaust. And so they baptized Anne Frank, for example. How obviously for that faith, they view it as very disrespectful that Mormons are going to all of these records from the Holocaust and using the records to be able to figure out who needs to be baptized to be Mormon in the afterlife. And the Catholic Church now has a rule that they're not giving the Mormon Church any of their documents because they realized, the church would come along and say, we love genealogy. We want to learn all about, grandparents and great-grandparents and who was immigrating from Europe. And it sounds great, but when these religions realized what they were using the names to do, they said they're not going to give this information over to the church anymore because they're objecting to what they're using it for.
So what do the Mormons believe happens when you die to, I guess, justify doing things like the baptisms for the dead, or like what is their idea of heaven? Like you say, the 1%, what does that look like for that 1%?
So the Mormon afterlife requires a flow chart in order to understand it. So if anyone's listening, I suggest Googling Mormon plan of salvation, and that will show you the flow chart. But basically, after we die, our body goes in the ground and our spirit or soul goes to what's called the spirit world. And if you were Mormon, you get to go to spirit paradise. And if you weren't Mormon, you go to spirit prison. And the only way you can cross from prison to paradise is if someone gets baptized for you for the dead in this life. All of the non-Mormons get sent to spirit prison, and then someone would go, knock on her door and say, hey, great-great-granddaughter just got baptized for you. You're good to go to paradise. And if she chose to accept the baptism, she would cross over into spirit paradise. But they aren't specifically heaven. It's very complicated to explain. So the spirit world is just a waiting place, a waiting room almost for Jesus to come again. And then after Jesus comes again, you get your final judgment, and there are 3 levels of heaven, and then there's 3 levels of the highest level of heaven. So the lowest level is the telestial kingdom. That's essentially Mormon hell, and people like me would go there. So that's apostates, murderers, degenerates, adulterers. And then the terrestrial kingdom is people who were good but didn't accept Mormonism. So if you have a Christian, a Muslim, Jewish person, someone who was religious and lived a good life and was kind, they probably would go to that second level. A standard good person who's a believer and does the right thing gets to go to the middle kingdom. And the celestial kingdom is the best kingdom. That is for Mormons. And to get to the highest level of the celestial kingdom, the highest level of Mormon heaven, so the highest level within the highest level, you have to do the endowment ceremony and you have to be married. So marriage in a temple is a prerequisite to getting to be in the highest level of Mormon heaven.
So that's obviously why when people come back from their mission, they're getting married, sometimes engaged within 2 weeks, and it's a very rush because you don't want to risk anything ever happening to you and you've not got married, right? Yeah,
so people are really serious about getting married and usually get married very young, very quickly. You're also taught that, if 2 righteous people get to know each other and get married, essentially can make it work. And so you're also taught that within a relationship, you are kind of a cog. Any 2 cogs that are righteous can fit together. And so you're not taught to search too thoroughly for compatibility or for someone you really connect with. It's just about finding someone who is a return missionary and has a calling in the church and wears the garments and has a temple recommend. So you're looking for the religious requirements about the person, not necessarily about compatibility as the first metric for if you should get with this person.
Okay, so one of the things that you mentioned as part of like the core things of before getting married is you guys should have done missionary work, which is obviously like you say, came to Colorado. What was that experience like? What was you expected to do?
I've heard people call Mormon missions the cult within the cult because they're so strict. I have this rule book that's almost 100 pages of just rules after rules after rules of all the things you're required to do. The biggest rule is that you're never allowed to be alone. That was my most difficult rule that I had to follow. So right now I'm in my house. There's a door behind me. If you were my companion and you needed to walk into the hallway, I would have to get up and follow you so that we would be together the whole time. So whether it's out on the street you're together, whether it's in the car you're together, even if, it would be considered disobedient if one person's in the car and then the car door gets closed and you walk a bit of a distance away, it'd be like, whoa, you're kind of separate right now.
So like, what about showering, going to the restroom, things like that? Are you allowed to do that alone?
Yeah, so showering and the bathroom are the only times you're allowed to be alone. And then you sleep in the same room too. So every missionary apartment always has 2 full beds on either side of the room. So you have to even sleep in the same room. And some people will set timers for showers to make sure people are not masturbating in the shower, basically, because that's people will needing their alone time and then accidentally falling into temptation. So whether it's a picture of Jesus in the shower or a timer, or people will clap while they're using the restroom or in the shower so that they're proving their hands are not occupied. Yeah, but the rule to stay together the entire time is one of the biggest rules that I had to follow.
How long was your mission?
My mission was 1.5 years and the men do 2 years.
So for a long time you're with somebody, and I'm guessing with these rules in place, you can't pick your best friend. Or
no.
How does that union work? Like, who decides who goes with who, and also who decides where you go?
For who decides where you go on your mission, that's the highest leaders of the church. There's the prophet, the 12 apostles, and the quorum of the 70. And someone within that, it's unclear who specifically. I think they take turns deciding where people are going on their mission, but they get to decide. So one of my reasons I really started questioning the church was because I had received this very strong impression that I was going to go on my mission to Italy. I wrote in my journal, I'm as sure as I will go to Italy on my mission as I know that God lives. And I was crying. It was an overwhelming experience. And so when I got my mission call, I almost felt like it was a waste of time to read it because I just knew I would be going to Italy. And I opened my mission call and it said Denver, Colorado. And I remember almost looking around like I wanted to speak to the manager or something because I felt like I'm confused. So that was a big question mark moment for me because I had such a powerful revelation, I thought, about where I would go, and it was just obviously false. And so then once you're on your mission president is responsible for all the missionaries. It's usually about 150 missionaries, so he gets to decide who your companion is, and it usually changes every 6 to 12 or more weeks. You have different transfers, but sometimes you do get placed with someone who you are besties with and you really bond with them, but then sometimes you get placed with somebody who you really don't get along, you don't see eye to eye, they maybe have some habits or cleanliness issues that you have to deal with and put up with, so it really is just luck of the draw, and you have no power where you get assigned within the mission and no power over who you're assigned to.
When you're on the mission and you're told this is who you're with for however long, this is where you're going, what is expected of you once you reach said location? What are you meant to do?
So you spend all of your time trying to get people to get baptized. So your number one role, I think people sometimes hear mission and they think you're building a church or you're doing service. On my mission, they really clamped down on don't do service. You should be trying to find people to baptize. So that was another thing I found super frustrating. And I felt like that was the opposite of what Jesus taught. I feel like Jesus was all about, ministering to the sick and afflicted. So, it could be knocking on doors, stores. It could be talking to people in the streets. If I saw someone in Target and they were alone and I felt compelled to go talk to them, I would go, "Hi, can I talk to you about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints?" And so most of your time is spent just trying to get people to get baptized.
Do you get given like a goal? Let's say like you've got to get 2 people a day. And then what happens if you don't get anybody to get baptized? What then?
Yeah, you're required to set goals. So you have lots of different metrics. It's very salesy. You have bigger goals, smaller goals, goals within the goals. So we had goals for how many members would be at lessons, how many prayers we would say, how many lessons we would give, how many people would come to church, how many baptisms. And then we'd have to report those goals to our district leader, and then they would be following up on our goals and see how they were doing. So they'd call and they'd be like, "Hey, I see you put down 5 lessons this week. How'd you do?" And if you didn't get it, you might have somebody come train you and try to get you to do better.
Whilst you're on these missions and also part of your childhood, you were journaling a lot. So when you look back at those journals, what shocks or surprises you the most that you were like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe I did that," or "that happened"?
I have a few primary sadnesses from my mission. I think I often viewed people as just another metric for baptism. People would say something, something like, "My daughter died when she was very young," or I just lost my job," or "I have a hardship in my life." And rather than responding to them in a human way, which is to be kind and listen and receptive and there for them, I would think about how to tie that into getting them to be baptized. And so I think I see in my journals a lot that people would say, "Oh, this bad thing happened in my life," and within 5 minutes we're asking them, would you commit to be baptized? It just felt so grimy to go back and read some of those things and see that I wasn't viewing people as human beings, I was viewing them as projects.
That is interesting you say that, because like you say, that was around the time that you were starting to question things as well, like whether it's not particularly listening to someone and their issue or their problem and just trying to get them in the church and get them baptized. And we said we weren't meant to be going out helping people that you maybe thought would need the help. It's more about get back onto whatever the goal is, right? So it's interesting that that's and these are the things that were making you realize or making you think at the time that was in their eyes, I guess, I don't know, would they see a mission as being really holy or like, you're fulfilling whatever the church really wants in that time? So it's ironic that in that time that you're doing what they deem is like such a huge part of the religion is the time when you're at the most, I guess, like vulnerable to it, thinking, is this really happening right now?
I wanted to be able to love people and be there for them sincerely. And another rule is that certain activities should take about an hour. So there would be times when someone would be sharing a really heartfelt story, and then I would see the hour was almost up and I'd say, "Well, we gotta go," and just cut it off. I would just feel like I had to follow the rules that I had committed myself to. It just means you're not really interacting with people in an organic human way. You're seeing them as projects, and you're seeing yourself as a rule-following person with all these responsibilities. I'm an atheist now, but I think if you read the Bible and see how Jesus interacts with these people, it's not how Mormon missionaries are taught to interact with people.
I find it so fascinating that highlighted so much to you, and that was one of the key things that started triggering into thinking, is this really right, or is this really for me? So I find that fascinating. That has gone on to you then meeting your husband, finding the right person for you. Like, it is a bit of divine intervention or fate. He had members of the family that weren't Mormon, so he could see as well, like, hey, we're not going to be eternally damned here.
His mom has always worked outside the home. She's this powerhouse of a nurse, and now she's in leadership at a hospital. So I also think, in addition to her not being Mormon, he also saw growing up a woman who was out of the home, having a rock star career, and saw that as a really positive thing, and she was still a good mother. So when we got married, it wasn't like, all right, where's my dinner? Where's my lunch? It was more approaching the relationship how he had seen his mom growing up, which is much more focused on a balance between family and career.
Since all of that has happened, one door that you've opened up for yourself and you've built from scratch is your platform, which is speaking out against the church. I think it's incredibly brave, especially given that was so ingrained within you and your family and your culture. Do you feel safe when you speak out online about the church? Like, do you ever receive threats? threats?
Yeah, I would say the threats are typically, I wish you would die, or go in a hole and die, or God will smite you, or in the afterlife you're going to burn, that kind of thing. So thankfully nothing that feels like a true ever-present threat that I have to be worried about. I do feel like whenever I go to Utah, I get anxious because I worry that someone might see me and get some idea in their head. And I'm not worried that the church would do anything, the church as an organization. I feel more worried about random members who come in and spam my comments and say, you're a horrible person and we hate you and go die. It's more that I'm worried that that kind of person will take it upon themselves to do something. So I do feel anxious. I haven't received anything that's truly feels like my family is in legitimate danger. It's more these types of generalized threats and anger targeted or sent towards me.
Have you ever received the complete polar end of the spectrum with messages, something that's been really surprising or a really emotional response to someone who has also gone through the same thing and I'm very thankful for all of your messages?
Yeah, that's most of my messages, thankfully, is people who are grateful for my videos and grateful for my content. I have had multiple people who say that they were close to ending their life and they decided not to. People who were going to serve missions and then chose not to, or people who finally were able to tell their families. And so those are my favorite emails to get is just people saying, hey, this really changed my life. I also wrote a book. It's called How to Leave the Mormon Church. So I'll get people emailing me saying, I read your book and it really helped. Those are really amazing to read. And especially a lot of them are not even necessarily ex-Mormons. I have ex-Muslims, ex-Christians, ex-Seventh-day Adventists, and ex-Jehovah's Witnesses. So it really spans the whole spectrum of belief.
Like you say, you did write a book, How to Leave the Mormon Church, which you say has affected people from all different kinds of religions and backgrounds. And it's kind of like a part memoir, part handbook almost. What do you hope people take away from it the most?
I think the biggest review that I've seen is people just feel like it is the friend that you wish was next to you when you're leaving a religion. A supportive voice, a loving voice. As I said, leaving religion is very isolating. Many of the people who you thought were in your corner and loved you unconditionally end up leaving and walking out of your life. And so I think the book is advice for some things as simple as trying coffee for the first time, or how to order your first cocktail, how to destigmatize sex and sexuality. But it's also just a very supportive voice that says and affirms this: the choice you're making is a good choice and you should love yourself throughout this, no matter what the people in your life are telling you about, you being evil or you being unfaithful. You are allowed to love yourself and you are allowed to make choices for your own life rather than allowing your religion to make those choices for you.
Like something that I thought was a fantastic subtitle, and you said from temple ceremonies to tank tops and lattes, and I think it's fantastic. I want to know, what was one thing that once you'd left the church, what was one thing that was your biggest joy that you was never allowed to do or experience that you've gone on to thoroughly enjoy?
There's so many. It's hard to choose, honestly. I really think bodily autonomy is my favorite thing. Whether, there's so many ways the church asserts that they own, or God owns your body, or the church owns your body, whether it's no tattoos, no immodest clothing, no alcohol, no coffee, you can't do any drugs, you can't get multiple piercings, all of these things are choices that you're not allowed to make with your own physical form. One of the first things I did after leaving was I got my ear pierced. I just love when I open my drawers in the morning. I love just choosing whatever I want to wear, and I don't have to question what's modest, what's appropriate, what does God want me to wear, what does my religion say I should wear. My body belongs to me, and I no longer have to feel like it's owned by another entity.
First of all, I think that's beautiful. You look great, and I love your piercings, your nose piercing, everything. I think you look fantastic. I love that you've done that. What do you think about people that maybe glamorize Mormon lifestyle? So by that specifically, I mean, there is a television show, The Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, that seem to hype it up, really glamorize that. How does that make you feel? Obviously living the reality of it and leaving.
I think that my frustration with the glamorization religion and the social media side of Mormonism is that it's really not, in my experience, indicative of what the real life experience is within the religion. They're not wearing their garments, whereas the rule is you're supposed to wear them 24/7. Sometimes they'll have tattoos or additional piercings, or they'll drink coffee, and those things aren't normal per se. I also think the massive amount of plastic surgery is actually sad to see because they've popped out so many babies and then they have to immediately turn around and get a bunch of plastic surgery to make sure it looks like they never had any of the babies. And so this yin and yang of never-ending babies and never-ending plastic surgery and always looking hot, it's a beautiful cage, but to me it is still a cage.
What was the hardest part of leaving that cage where you know where you're at, right? You know what the rules are, you know what is expected of you. You're living in a very confined, structured environment, to then rebuilding your life completely from scratch, which has got to be very overwhelming. It's a lot, right? And also very empowering, I'm sure, too. But what was that like? Because all of a sudden having so much restriction to so much freedom must be quite scary.
I think it's very common for ex-Mormons in the first 6 months or so, and really all ex-religious people, to make some decisions that they ultimately regret, because it's like your training wheels have come off and you're just speeding down a very steep mountain. Because I've met people who they immediately downloaded Tinder, they told their husband, I want to have an open relationship, and then they slept with 5 or 6 people and then immediately regretted it. But because they were raised in this hyper strict religion that never allowed them to even masturbate or experience anything sexually, as soon as they stop believing, it's like the kid in the candy store. And whether it's, some people will do that with drugs, some people will do that with sex, some people will do that with cutting off their entire family and saying the church is wrong. I think there's a phase that a lot of people go through where they have to really mourn the life that they never got to have. And sometimes that takes the form of having behaviors that are really scary, or things that they ultimately end up regretting because they're trying to so fully break free of their religion.
I will say the girls in the show that we just mentioned, they're maybe like trying to break free their religion, but a lot of the things you said that are mentioned and shown in that, where they're getting with each other's husbands, things that would be deemed in the church to be super taboo and like, you're going to go to hell forever. And that the things that they're doing are things that would probably get them kicked out of the church, and it's not necessarily the reality. I think people get very confused. They're all rich, they're all living this crazy lifestyle, and that's not necessarily the reality of 99.9% of Mormons.
Yeah, and even in the show, Taylor Frankie Paul's mom is like, have you talked to your bishop about this? Have you confessed any of this? And she says, no, I think because she doesn't want to get in trouble. And so even in that conversation, it's made clear that the behavior a lot of them are engaging in isn't Mormon behavior. They are breaking the rules, and I think that's why the show is so salacious, because they are holding this Mormon identity and breaking the rules. So what you're seeing in the show is people both rebelling against the religion and still being involved in the culture of the religion, and that's why I thought it was a really interesting show, but it's certainly not representative of if someone was living the squeaky clean Mormon lifestyle that most members live.
Absolutely. What would you say was the absolute hardest bit of rebuilding your life?
I think just from a family perspective, I know I really let down so many of my family members and then continue to let them down with my channel. It is hard to feel like random people on the internet are proud of me and happy and learn from my story and enjoy my story, and then the people in my life who are so important to me and so special to me are disappointed with me and ashamed of me. So I think squaring that is very emotionally confusing, because it's strange to have people you don't know rooting for you and people who you do know disappointed with you.
I can tell when you're saying it, it really affects you. I can imagine it's like quite like a mind fuck, basically, isn't it? Like there's all these people I've never met that are like rooting for me, buying my book, reaching out, saying thank you so much, and then the people that it would mean the most from, that you hope would be the ones to literally even just listen or have the conversation. Like, how do you deal with that? How do you cope with that?
Probably not well, honestly. Typically now with my family, we just don't talk about it, and it's whenever I first started becoming more popular on the internet, we had some conversations and it was very emotional and tears. And I basically said, I'm not planning on taking the videos down. I'm not planning on deleting the account. I'm going to keep talking about it. Still, I hope we can still be in each other's lives. And now it's basically, we just don't talk about it. And we just talk about my kids, we talk about the weather. I live in Texas and all of them live in other states, so we also don't see each other that often, but it can be very strange. It's very complicated, and I feel like it's strange to have something that is important to me and such a big thing in my life feel like it's totally a secret. You know, I'd love to be able to send a screenshot, hey, I just hit 100,000 YouTube subscribers and send that off to the family chat and have everyone be like, wow, way to go. But we literally just pretend like it doesn't exist. And I'm okay for that to be the case because I really just don't want to lose my relationships with my family. In a perfect world, I would just wish that it didn't have to be something that was pulling us apart, but that brought us together.
Makes a lot of sense. And I really do feel for you there because it's got to be incredibly difficult. But I hope for what it is worth, they're not your blood relatives and your family. For the hundreds of thousands of people that watch your videos, that get some solace, that get advice, I hope you realize how many lives that you do help. And I think that's incredible. So I really hope that comforts your heart a little bit.
My husband is also a huge support. I have a few friends. I mentioned earlier, some of my friends have left the church and we've reconnected, and they are my cheerleaders. I have one friend who, I had one video that hit 1 million views, and she sent me this little care package and was like, congratulations on 1 million. I feel like very lucky to have some people in my life who are really cheering me on and just honestly fans and supportive. And I feel like I just want my family. And if they can't be supportive for me, it's okay. I can look past that because it's just important to me to still have my family in my life. And even if that means that I don't get to send the screenshot in the group chat, I feel like with my husband loving me and supporting me, and with all of these people reaching out and saying, thank you for your videos, I feel like I can make peace with not having that affirmation from my family. And I'll just take what the love that they can offer, basically.
If you could go back to little 16-year-old Alyssa that's in the middle of all of this and thinking like, hey, why are those boys playing outside? And why am I doing the cooking and the cleaning? And what's going on? What would you say to her? What advice would you give her? Or how would you guide her in any way?
That's really tricky because I honestly feel like if I appeared to my 16-year-old self, I would probably make myself cry. Just because I know that 16-year-old me would be disappointed who I've become because she was just still indoctrinated to believe that anyone who left was not going to go to Mormon heaven, basically. And I saw this a while ago that was like, would your childhood self be proud of you? And the response was, I might not make my 16-year-old self proud, but I'm making the me that I have now proud. And I can honestly say that if I were to go back, I think I would just say, hey, I know that this didn't all turn out maybe how you expected it to turn out, but I'm really happy. And you can believe me or not, but I hope you know that when you reach this point, you're going to be proud and happy of who you've become.
Thank you so much for being so honest. You've been absolutely incredible. I can't wait to see how the rest of your journey unfolds. You are such an inspiration to so many people. So keep going, Alyssa, because you're fantastic, okay?
Thank you for interviewing me and for all of your great questions. I really appreciate it.
Alyssa has rebuilt her entire identity brick by brick. Her courage to leave the only life she ever knew behind is inspiring. So whether you're questioning your faith or you just love a good reinvention story, she is proof that walking away from eternity does not mean losing your soul. It actually might just be how you finally find it. If you liked today's episode, give us a 5-star review, leave a comment, share, like, subscribe, and I'll be back next week. Thanks for listening.